All right, let's talk a little bit about what's happening or not happening with the government shutdown. And big picture here, we have a lot of lawmakers that are not in Washington, D.C. because they don't necessarily need to be there. The House is not in session. They haven't been in session for several weeks. The Senate has been in session, but they went home over the weekend because it didn't look like there was any progress being made. You have the president returning from an overseas trip, and he's sitting down with 60 Minutes for the first time. He sat down in 60 Minutes for a long time. And during this interview, he was asked about his role in the shutdown, but also in solving the shutdown. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say.
Let's vote. And you can open, the economy could open up during our interview.
Is there something you can do,
Maybe it did.
though? Is there something you
All
can
I can
do to bring
is
this to
give
an
the
end?
facts. Here's what I can't do. I can't give them $1.5 trillion so that they can give welfare to people that came into our country illegally, so that prisoners and that people from mental institutions and people that are drug dealers get vast amounts of money for health care. That I can't do.
So
what I can do is I can continue to run a great country. We have the best economy we've ever had. I can continue to do that. What they should do, look, this started a long time ago. I always said, and you know I've been very consistent, Obamacare is terrible. It's bad health care at far too high a price. We should fix that. We should fix it. And we can fix it with the Democrats. All they have to do is let the country open and we'll fix it. They have to let the country open and I'll sit down with the Democrats and we'll fix it. But they have to let the country. And you know what they have to do?
Okay, so at least you hear a little bit of how the president is talking about this. I want to walk you through what he said here. Part of this conversation went into a procedure called, I don't even know if procedure is the right word. You hear the term filibuster. There's a procedure that's in the Senate that requires a certain majority, a certain number, a higher than majority vote to get a bill to pass into a period of time for the bill to be considered and voted upon. So if you think about what happened in high school and student council, whoever got the most votes wins. And it's easy to think that way about bills, any legislation that's passed. Well, whoever gets the most vote wins. Yes, that's true. But sometimes you need an additional number of votes to get over this procedural hump to get to the actual voting session. And what has both parties have toyed with over the years is to get rid of this procedure, easy enough for me to say, get rid of the filibuster. So the party that's in the majority has more ease to pass what they need because you just need a majority then. You don't need 60 votes. You need 51. And that's it. And even with a slim majority, the party that would be in power would be able to move legislation more easily. The House and the Senate have different roles in government. In many ways, the House was structured to be, for lack of a better term, a little bit more emotional. People get elected every 2 years. They're going to quickly or not quickly represent their constituents. They're moving at a faster pace. For senators, they're elected for a 6-year period. A third of the Senate is up for a vote every four years. I'm sorry, every voting period, the Senate is up for a third of the Senate is up for vote. For Congress, they're running re-election as soon as they get elected. So the Senate is there and has been viewed and described as a more, I don't want to say stable form of government, but it has that reputation. Things are going to move a little bit more slowly. The senators are there for a little bit longer. There's different procedures in place. So the question here is about what actually gets this continuing resolution, which is a temporary funding bill, to an actual vote in the Senate. What happened back in the spring was that Democrats agreed to at least let the bill get to a vote. When the bill got to a vote, Republicans passed it. And Senator Schumer and other Democrats were criticized for not holding the line, preventing that vote from taking place. Because as soon as the vote takes place, the bill's going to pass. So this is the situation we're in right now, where even the president of the United States is saying, hey, Republicans need to get tougher. That's one of the things that he said. He said, yes, Democrats could do away with the filibuster and they're going to be able to pass whatever they want to pass. But right now, what Republicans need to do is get tough, do away with the filibuster and get this to a vote and get the government temporarily funded. Even that, though, there's a question about process with it. So when we talk about what's going on with the shutdown, there's always a clock attached to it that we're not always aware of. And this is something that is, the clock is continuing to tick as lawmakers are trying to figure out their next steps. What is an interesting part of this story to now consider is that the original temporary funding bill that the House passed would only fund the government to November 21st, right before Thanksgiving. So we're coming up on that pretty quick. And then you would have to have another vote, a continuing resolution, a temporary bill, likely to keep the government up and running and funded through the holidays. So all of these timelines are merging and intersecting and bumping into each other. Because even if this original temporary funding bill is passed, it's only going to buy lawmakers a little bit of time before they have to renegotiate again. That doesn't seem to be coming across very clearly, and that's going to be more of an issue. This timing of all of this is going to become even more and more of an issue, especially as we get closer to the holidays. And I know you're already hearing the Christmas music. The transportation secretary was asked about this, about the impact on the FAA. So as we went into the weekend, the FAA sends out a message on X and essentially says the government has to get funded. We're starting to see, labor shortages because our federal employees are being asked to show up for work. They're not getting paid, and this is a problem. And we could look at that at a smaller level. Okay, there's fewer TSA agents. But when we talk about air traffic control and how that's impacting travel across the United States, then it feels like the stakes go up quite a bit. So the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, was asked about this. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Also have safety concerns at this point.
So I think that's a great question. We work overtime to make sure the system is safe, and we will slow traffic down. You'll see delays. We'll have flights canceled to make sure the system is safe. But we have to be honest, when we have controllers where we have shortages in towers and TRACONs doing two jobs, does it add more risk into the system? Sure it does. But again, we're always managing that. Again, we don't want crashes. We want people to go safely. And so we will slow and stop traffic if we don't think we can manage it in a way that keeps people safe as they go from point A to point B. I'm clearly asking them, come to work. It is your job to come to work, and eventually you will be paid. But as I've traveled around the country and talked to air traffic controllers, they've told me that a lot of them can navigate missing one paycheck. None of them can manage missing two paychecks. So we have old equipment. We have technicians that work in the towers that keep the equipment operational. They're not getting paid. I have train inspectors who are working to keep our trains running and running safely. They're working without pay. I have pipeline inspectors, same thing. Across the system, we have a number of people who are working without pay. We talk about the air traffic controllers, but I have thousands of employees who are showing up, doing the work, and trying to keep this system safe for the American people, all the while they don't get paid to do it.
I thought that was a really important soundbite to listen to because, yes, the focus is clearly on air traffic controllers because how could it not be? It's really scary to even think about not having an extra level of protection for planes landing and departing. But then what the transportation secretary is talking about is a whole bunch of other roles that likely a lot of us don't think about that are also working without pay right now that many of us would probably consider pretty essential. And because they're considered essential, this is why they're having to work. But what we saw during a previous shutdown is suddenly there was a lot of call outs. People saying they're not going to come into work, maybe they're not feeling well, whatever. And that was one of the pressure points that led to at least fuel some negotiations. I see a note from Tara. Tara, yes, Jenna, my little brother is being expected to work 50 plus hours of work as an air traffic controller, all not getting paid. Yeah, and Tara, I'm curious how he feels about that because surely that doesn't feel good, but he probably has a sense of duty, so he wants to show up. But how long can he do that? And that actually is one of the bigger parts of this conversation about the shutdown that we're skimming a little bit of the surface, which is how many Americans right now are actually working paycheck to paycheck. We all likely know what that's like, working paycheck to paycheck. How long could you go without really having to significantly dip into your savings or get outside assistance? That seems to be a broader conversation about pay and benefits and for example, for air traffic controllers or otherwise. Another area that this comes up is in SNAP benefits. So likely you've seen or heard a little bit about SNAP benefits. These are federal assistance. This is money that the state is then administering to people in the state that need food assistance. And right now, the numbers suggest that just over 41 million Americans receive this assistance in some way. Hold up, let's just stop right there. That seems to be a big headline. Isn't that the bigger story? Yes, it's the shutdown in the political process, but did you know that 41 million plus Americans were receiving this sort of assistance on a regular basis? Interesting to think about, just over $187 on average, apparently per person, as we're looking at the numbers. So depending on how your family structure and what that looks like, I don't know exactly how that looks like for every single individual that's receiving this assistance, but that's a big story. We have 41 plus, almost 42 million Americans on this form of assistance. The backstory to this is that the federal government came out under President Trump and said, we don't have any funds, so we can't distribute this come November. And we had two different cases pop up, one in Boston in federal court there and one in Rhode Island. So one in Massachusetts in Boston and one in Rhode Island. And basically these were legal challenges saying, hey, federal government, where the state is administering this, you have to dip into some of your emergency funds in order to give Americans the assistance that's been promised to them. What the government has said is, listen, we can't touch these funds. Yeah, we have emergency funds, but those are for things like natural disasters. We're actually not allowed to dip into those funds to pull them out because a shutdown is not considered a disaster that this sort of fund is made to be used for. So in general, just to summarize what the federal judges said going into the weekend is that basically the federal government has to figure it out, that they either need to dip into some of these funds or they need to dip into other funds to try to provide this assistance. So the judges kicked it back to the Trump administration and said, listen, you guys got to figure, whatever way you got to figure it out in some capacity. So today, what will be really interesting to watch, we're talking just after noon Central Time, is to see, do we get an announcement from the USDA, from the federal government, that says, okay, this is how we're going to temporarily try to solve for this, and or we're appealing those rulings by those federal judges to the Supreme Court, to a higher court. Both of those things could actually happen at the same time. But either way, we're in a little bit of a standoff here as to where these emergency funds could come from. But the federal judges, in some capacity, ordered the government to try to figure it out either today or over the next few days until we get to midweek. So this is going to be a story that we definitely need to continue to watch. So all of these things are percolating. You know, there's all of these little fires. I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing them. I'm not dismissing them. But as these fires pop up that the federal government is having to figure out, the question is, does that actually translate to lawmakers to feel more motivated to try to find a path forward? And what does that actually look like? President Trump says that he has not liked the healthcare law passed under the Obama administration. Is there a path forward for President Trump and this administration and the Republicans that are under this umbrella to work with Democrats to improve it? Is that, if we're going to consider the worst case scenario, which is the shutdown continues, that nothing really improves at all, can we continue to consider the other scenario, which is there room for improvement in some of these programs, and is there a path forward? And right now, it doesn't seem to be clear. So the big takeaway is you got a lot of different people that are going to start needing more support, whether we're talking about air traffic controllers or those folks that receive SNAP benefits. As that continues, does the pressure rise on lawmakers to figure something out here? And what actually stops this impasse? I wish I had a better answer for you, something more enlightening. But right now, that's where things stand.